Thank you for listening to Remake Rewind, the podcast where we decided remakes or reboots should have happened. I'm Mike, and with me today I've got a special, and I really do mean special, guest host, Nick Gambino from Get to the Podcast. How you doing, Nick?
I'm good. I feel like you really emphasize special in like a way. I'm like, is this guy slandering me right now? Like, is he being for real?
It's a little bit of both.
It's a little bit of both. You know, I'll take it. I could dish it. I could take it.
Good. Those of you guys who have been listening to the show for a while, Nick has popped on before. He was on our 10th episode, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Willy Wonka. I've actually popped on their show once to talk about Marvel movies. As everyone knows, I am a huge Marvel nerd, so pretty good friend of the show. And we just, you know, as we all know, Double D and Alex are taking a little bit of time off for the holidays. They work retail, unfortunately, so we didn't want to stop producing the show, so we got some guest hosts, and I'm really glad that Nick's coming on, so thanks, Nick.
Yeah, you're welcome. Here I am.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your podcast at the front, and I'll give you some soapbox time at the tail end as well.
Okay, cool. Good. Yeah, I host the podcast Get to the Podcast, which is a movie-centric podcast with two other guys, Tiago and Neil. And we basically just shit talk. No, that's not really a good way of saying it. It's a weekly episode, drops every Tuesday morning, and we basically talk movies, old, new. It usually ends up leading into heated arguments. It can get pretty intense, but you know, even though we have a lot of vile towards each other, we're big movie lovers, so we always try not to rip apart and shred movies. We're not really about trashing movies. We're really about just discussing them from a movie lover's viewpoint. And it's called Get to the Podcast.
Pretty good podcast. I listen to it every week. The only thing that's a little annoying is Neil doesn't like fun movies.
Yeah, it's weird, right? He's so cynical in his old age. The guy's like 90 years old. Yeah. He's like, Marvel sucks.
He finds a way to bring Marvel up every episode, even when it's not applicable. It makes me furious, but it makes me laugh every time.
Yeah, and he also believes they faked the moon landing, so he's one of those guys.
Does he really?
He sure does. I hope he listens to this so that he hears me saying that. I'm really just saying that to bust his balls. But yeah, now, ridiculous. I mean, here's the thing: if you go back to like the movie hoods from our childhood, the movies from our childhood, he loves them. He loves Back to the Future. He loves Jurassic Park. Like he loves the old classic, you know, every nerd's dream kind of movies. But when it comes to like new Marvel movies, he's just like,
Yeah. Whatever. He's lame. Yeah. That's why he hasn't been on the show yet.
That's what it is.
You and Tiago.
I know. Got to get him on.
Yeah, eventually. I keep meaning to, and then I don't know why we haven't. We have to because we've had everybody else on. We might as well have him.
Yeah, he's fun. I think he's the strongest voice on our show. That's what I think. But that's just me. Yeah.
Well, it's hard to tell when you're talking over everybody.
I know. I'm really terrible. I am terrible. It's terrible for an audio podcast too to just be like hogging the mic.
Yep. All right, well, let's get into it. So for this episode, I let you pick the movie. So what did we decide to talk about this week?
Okay, so we're going to talk about one of my favorite movies and then the remakes of that movie. You have Seven Samurai, which is a Kurosawa film Japanese film from 1954, and then it was remade in Hollywood in 1960 as a Western, and then remade in 2016, I believe, in Hollywood again, Denzel Washington, a bunch of other guys, as Magnificent Seven. So those three movies.
Yep. Cool. Do you have a summary to read for the first one?
I could do that. I'm totally going to jack and plagiarize on IMDb. All right. Here's one. So a veteran samurai who has fallen on hard times answers a village's request for protection from bandits. He gathers 6 other samurai to help him, and they teach the townspeople how to defend themselves, and they supply the samurai with 3 small meals a day. The film culminates in a giant battle when 40 bandits attack the village. So that's the less poetic summary. But there you go. Can I freestyle a little summary real quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good. So it's basically, this movie is, you have these samurai who are disgraced samurai who are requested by this small village of farmers who are going to be raided by bandits come harvest time. They go and they seek out these samurai amongst a bunch of disgraced samurai, and they find one key guy who brings 6 other samurai into the fold, and they agree to save this village from these 40 bandits. So it's really a bunch of incompetent farmers, 7 samurai, 40 murderous, rapist thieves, and this movie gets crazy.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty much right on the money. The thing that's interesting about this movie, and I can see why it's been remade so many times. In fact, there was another remake of this movie in like the 80s called like The Lost Planet or Battle of the Stars or something like that. That's like a futuristic space version of this premise. So it is a really simple premise, and it really does lead to being able to be remade in any time frame. They could go back and do this in the Civil War. They could go back and do this, King Arthur style. They can go into the future and do this. So it's one of those movies. Like it's kind of like a blueprint for a movie.
It is. It's like the 300
the
story, really. It's like 300 in a way.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's different, but it's like that idea of like a small number of warriors, like skilled warriors against a huge army.
Right. And what I like about realistically every version, all three movies, I think they did a good job with making a force that's sufficiently difficult enough that it could overwhelm them, but not so large that it is not believable that a well-trained group of soldiers could take them on. So in this particular movie, it was 40 soldiers or 40 bandits that they were going to be fighting.
Right.
And they kept track of it. They had like a little tally every time they killed a bandit. They tracked it down like, okay, so by the time they got to the final battle, there was only something like 12 bandits left.
Right.
Kind of thing. So I think that's impressive that you have 7 people and you have, hundreds of villagers that aren't trained, but you give them enough training, they'll actually be able to overcome these trained bandits. So that's something that I did appreciate, that, unlike 300, where it's 300 men versus hundreds of thousands of people,
right.
You knew they were going to be defeated eventually. Like, this seems feasible.
Plausible.
That, done correctly, they could do it.
Right. Right. And you watched this movie for the first time, right? Like,
yeah, so I actually hadn't seen any of the 3 movies that we're talking about today.
Wow. That's crazy. And
I may have seen the 1960s one as a child and just don't remember it. I'm not really a big Western guy.
Yeah, okay.
My dad liked Westerns, but I was never really into them.
Yeah, it's very much a niche.
In fact, really the only Western that I've really liked, like truly liked, was the Coen Brothers True Grit. I loved that movie. And 3:10 to Yuma was pretty good.
Right.
But other than that, I've never really been a Western guy, so this hasn't been something that I really pursued. The 2016 movie with Chris Pratt, Denzel Washington, Ethan Hawke, I actually really wanted to see it when it was in theaters, but I just didn't get around to it.
Right.
But yeah, this movie I know is on like everybody's top 100 films of greatest movies of all time, the 1954 Toho version.
Yeah.
Which is crazy that the same year that Godzilla came out, same studio.
Yeah, same studio. Almost
bankrupted.
Yeah,
whenever you think Toho, you just think monster movies, but
right.
They obviously did other movies.
Yeah. I read that between Godzilla and Seven Samurai, the studio almost went bankrupt when they were making it because there was so much money being thrown out. I mean, Seven Samurai is a close to 4-hour movie. It's like 3.5+ hour movie. And it's like there's a lot of stuff going on. That I think the shoot went months. There's a lot of money being thrown at that movie.
It's shot for like 164 days, so almost 6 months.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Worth of shooting, which is great. In the winter, like the final battle scenes when it's all muddy and everything, they were filming that in sandals in the winter time.
Right.
Like they were freezing, and like that movie, like so. When I look at how I watch movies and how I do the podcast, I'm not in film like you are.
Right.
I'm not in film like my wife Katrina is. So I don't necessarily look at these movies as from like the cinematography, how it got made. That's I don't have a frame of reference for that. But I typically watch movies kind of like the opposite of Neil, where it's just like these are movies I like, and then I dive deep into the movies that I like or the movies that I cover on the podcast.
Right.
But even this movie, watching, I was like, holy shit! Like. The battles they have, like they're not using stunt doubles. They're not using anybody. They're using like 40 people with actual bamboo spears and horses charging around, kicking their legs and everything. Like this was an incredibly dangerous film set.
Yeah, it's pretty nuts. Like, it's all practical effects,
which is insane. And then it being a black and white movie, obviously they have to do a lot more setup in terms of lighting and everything to make it where you can actually see what's going on at night scenes and everything like that. So even though it's there was a point that I kind of laughed at the movie where it had, and this is a transition that we kind of credit to Star Wars now, but like the sideways kind of swipe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It did that a lot, and I kind of laughed at it initially, but I realized, and for the time, that would have been something that wasn't, we laugh at that today because that's something you can do in PowerPoint and Windows Movie Maker, but that was actually
right. Innovative.
Pretty innovative at the time.
Yeah.
So it was really... It took me probably a good 45 minutes to an hour to get out of my 2018 mind frame to watch this 1954 movie.
Right. It does take that. That's the thing. We've talked about that on our podcast too. It's this thing where you got to put yourself in that frame of mind of the time period. And it's difficult for some people to do, but it's necessary if you want to enjoy a movie from that era. You have to be like, oh, they haven't developed all this other stuff yet. So I have to just, I've got to be an audience member sitting in a theater and realize none of this was created for home video either. Yeah, I think you watched a good chunk of this on your iPad, right? Or your tablet.
This one I watched on my TV completely. What's kind of funny is it actually had an intermission because obviously it's 3.5 hours and but it kept the intermission on the Amazon Prime rental. So there was like a 15-minute screen that just said intermission on it.
With the music, yeah.
Which I thought was kind of funny.
Yep.
But this is something, honestly, like 10, 15 years ago, I probably wouldn't have been able to watch. Like, it wasn't until I hit like my 20s where I could go back and watch old movies. Like, I used to not like watching black and white movies. I used to not like watching really anything prior to the 70s, 80s,
right?
Because I couldn't get my mind around the bad special effects. And you know, we make this joke a lot on our podcast. We did it during anytime we covered a movie from like the 70s, 60s, 50s, whatever, whether it was like True Grit, The Fly, Charlton Heston as in Planet of the Apes, where it's this acting in the 50s through really. Even Marlon Brando changed a little bit, but even he was still kind of this, where it was stoic, angry, stoic, angry. Like,
right.
It was really hard for me to watch older movies, and now I can go through and appreciate. Okay, that was just the style. I can get in, so like I had to mature a little bit before I could watch movies like this.
Yeah, and I get that. I really do. Like, that's never been like when people bring that up. I'm like, I understand that. I think to a degree. I get that sense myself sometimes where I'm like, oh, okay, good, because I have to consciously be in that frame of mind. I'm not like deluding myself that like, oh, this is exactly like a movie from this year. Like, that's just not. There's no way I'm gonna think that, especially with the acting style and even just the way the audio is recorded and the way the shots are set up. A lot of two shots, a lot of medium and wide shots. Some of these movies, not Seven Samurai, but some of these movies, the camera doesn't move a lot, so there's not a lot of action in the movies. Right. I watched this 1953 Japanese movie recently, not to get too far off topic, Tokyo Story, where nothing happens in the entire film. It's a beautiful film, but like nothing ever happens. Like it's so like there's no action. It's barely a drama, barely any tension, and it's like 2.5 hours. And then the movie's over, and the camera never moves. It's pretty much just placed in front of two people, and they perform their scenes. And there's not a lot of like fluid motion or anything to kind of make it more lively. And I enjoyed the movie, but I was like, okay, I get it. No, I couldn't show this to my wife or somebody else and have them go, "Oh my god, this is so like amazing."
Right.
Yeah.
Well, what was funny was with this movie, and I'm not gonna lie, there was points where I was a little bored in this movie, but I was also sick on cold medicine, barely able to stay conscious at certain points. My wife is a YouTuber, and she was busy doing some Christmas specials for her YouTube channel. And during one of the skirmishes, so it wasn't like the final battle, but one of the skirmishes, my wife walks by, she stops, and her jaw just drops. She's like, "Holy shit, what is this?" And I explained, I tell her what movie it is, and she was just like, "That's incredible." And, she is an actress. She's on a film set several days a week.
Right.
She's been in some big budget action movies in the background. She's been in TV shows. She's done a little bit of everything. And she was just like, those are real people. That's actually happening.
Yeah.
This is insane. She's like, her breath was taken away. So like I feel like this movie is one of those movies that the people whose film list it is in the top 100 or top 10, whatever it is, those are people who make movies, who are part of the movie industry, and they see the magic behind it, where somebody like me, it's a little bit harder. And that's why I do appreciate my wife, and she's kind of taught me to look at things a little bit differently. So like in our last episode, we covered A Star Is Born, and there was this like scene that like I don't tear up in movies very often, but there was this scene that the cinematography was just so beautiful, where it's the first time she's singing on stage with Bradley Cooper's character, and then you kind of see the audience, and you see everybody's just like blown away, and then you kind of just see Bradley Cooper, Lady Gaga, and then you see the sun setting, and then you just see these trees and this like purple sky, and it was just so beautiful that honestly, before my wife, I would have never noticed how beautiful that shot was. It would just been like, oh, it's a sweeping thing, and I even teared up a little bit on that. So
that's awesome.
It's interesting to see how different movies like this work with people. Like, honestly, I'm changing a little bit, but I guarantee if I had Double D, probably would have liked this movie, but he probably wouldn't have appreciated what went behind it. Alex did go to film school a little bit. He probably would have liked it and caught a lot of this stuff as well. But I don't know. I really do appreciate talking with someone like you who is still doing film
Right.
So why don't you tell me some of your highlights of this movie? What do you think really stands out? What people, if they decide to watch this, should look for?
Okay, so first I want to talk about story and character, because I'm a writer, and that is something that kind of in this day and age, and especially even as of like Hollywood 1960 when they made the remake with Magnificent Seven, there's this thing where they're like, well, we got to make it short. We got to get to the point really quick, and we can't just draw things out. And Seven Samurai, it's 3.5 to 4 hours. They don't even get the samurai all together until an hour into the movie. Like in any other movie, that would have been like seven. It's Magnificent Seven. Good. We have to have all 7 of them in 7 minutes. Like it would be like everybody would be together within 10 to 20 minutes tops. And I like it because it allows you to really fall into this world. It creates an environment. It creates, I feel like I know what I'm watching. This takes place in the 1500s in Japan, and I feel like I'm watching that. I don't feel like I'm watching 1954 Japan. I feel like I'm watching these characters and their struggle. These farmers are completely in despair. They don't know what they're going to do. They luckily have one young guy who's willing to basically be like, no, we need to kill them all. Let's fight them. And he's got that fire in his belly, and he's like, we got to do something. And then they go to the old man, who's like the wise old man of the village, and he's like, yes, you'll go get samurai, and they will come and they'll protect us. But this.
Well, and he even goes to the point saying, because this village is so poor that they were like, well, we can't afford samurai. It's like, go get like disgraced samurai who are basically homeless. Get the ones who will work for just food, kind of thing. So what's even more impressive is like these samurai are not necessarily the best samurai out there, the ones that they get.
Right. You know, it's interesting though. I've looked up a little bit of the history of like, because I always found that fascinating. These aren't. When you think samurai, you think of honorable samurai, you know, fighting for their lords and their masters, and you know, maybe the emperor or whatever. And this was a different take on it because they don't dive.
You think armor?
Yeah, armor.
Like you was picturing with the scaled armor.
Yeah.
And they don't have
that. Not really. A very little bit, if anything. But then if you look at the history of this was in the 1500s, and these disgraced samurai aren't disgraced in the way that they're not like a bunch of drunks and piece of shit, but they're like their masters or their lords had died, so they're unemployed. Like if you think about that, if you serve a master, they're Ronin. If you serve a master, that master is gone, dead, whatever. What do? You're a samurai, and you are now jobless. You are effectively out of a job, and so you're kind of like in this no man's land of what do you do with your skills? And so they go to this other village, and they find there's all these samurai walking around who are jobless. They're Ronin, and most of them have too much pride to work for a bunch of farmers for some rice. They're like, are you kidding me? Right. I'm a samurai. And then a couple of these samurai are kind of piece of shit. A couple of them are, at least one of them is like a drunkard and like incompetent. Not the ones they end up getting, but like as they're on their search. And I just love them like taking the time to really create this world and tell me what the hell's going on and who these people are. I love that. And then they come across who's possibly one of my favorite. He's the OG Obi-Wan. Like this guy is like Obi-Wan Kenobi. And if you look, George Lucas was heavily, heavily influenced by Kurosawa, the director of this film.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
For Star Wars. Star Wars
himself has said.
Yeah.
Yeah, he said that on multiple occasions. It was this and like the old pulps like Flash Gordon and everything. He wanted to merge the two.
Exactly. And if you look at, Jedis are just space samurai. That's all they are. They're samurai. Yeah. And Obi-Wan is basically this character played by Takashi Shimura. First off, I don't speak Japanese. I've never spoken Japanese. I am not Japanese, so I'm probably going to butcher some of these names and these words as we do this podcast. But this guy...
Oh, it's all good.
Yeah, this guy is incredible. There's something about him that I love. He's wise. He's calm, but he can put on his game face when the time comes. And he's very Obi-Wan. And I love his character, and he's really when they find him, he's the puzzle that brings out every other puzzle piece together.
Right, he's the one who. What I liked is when they find him, he isn't initially just like, no, I'm not going to do this kind of thing. He's like, well, if I were to do this, I would need, based off your village, there's no protection here, here, or here, so we would need at least 2 samurai on either side, plus however many villagers. So. At this point, we're going to need 7 samurai. So he like does this math to figure out they need 7 samurai to even begin to look at this town. And they're like, oh, you're going to do it? He goes, no, I'm just kind of pondering it.
Right. I didn't say I was going to do it, goddammit.
Yeah, and so then they talk him into it. And once he's talked into it, he's just like, he's there.
Yeah.
kind of thing. So
he's assumed the responsibility.
I did like that.
Yeah,
exactly. There are a lot of things that I kind of want to bring up that are different from the two remakes.
Yep.
Which there are a lot of things that initially I kind of, after I watched these movies, I kind of thought about it, like what were the differences, what did I like and what did I appreciate? Because there were times in this 3-hour movie, because it is a chore to watch this movie to an extent.
Yeah.
You gotta like put yourself in there, and it, like you said earlier, it being in Japanese and subtitled, it's not really something that you can not pay attention to.
Right, you got to read everything.
So even taking notes for this was difficult. I was pausing and rewinding a lot, but I really wanted to kind of like ponder and think about what the differences were afterwards. And a lot of these I don't think I can really bring up until after we kind of talk about the other ones, because this one had a longer time period between they find out that the bandits are coming before the actual attack. So that allowed a lot of different things to change.
Right.
So I kind of, if there's not anything else you kind of want to talk about with this one, I'd kind of like to move on, but I definitely want to come back to this movie in a bit.
Yeah, definitely. I would like I just want to mention this one character, which is, so that guy I just mentioned, that's like the Obi-Wan kind of guy. Both he and this other guy, Toshiro Mifune, these two guys were like the Leonardo DiCaprio to Martin Scorsese, like, and Robert De Niro to Martin Scorsese. These guys were like in so many Kurosawa films. But this Mifune guy, he's like,
for a more modern take, the Tom Hardy to Christopher Nolan.
There you go. That's a good one. Exactly. And this guy who's a younger guy, but he's so crazy and out of his fucking mind. I love his character. He's so insane in this movie.
I really liked that character too.
And
are you talking about the guy who was training them?
Yeah.
And then like kept yelling at the kids and then found all the armor?
Yes, exactly. That guy. And you find out like in the movie. I don't know how much we want to spoil for people. It's not really that much, but you find out.
This movie's just 80 years old.
74 years old.
We can spoil it.
Okay, good. He's not a samurai. He kind of gives this illusion that he's samurai, but he's actually was born of a farmer's life. So he's got like so much disdain for like almost everybody, like the samurai, the farmers, himself. He's angry. He's upset. And you find out, I mean, this guy is a farmer himself. And he does this whole kind of monologue where he's like frothing at the mouth, angry. And he's kind of like and then at the end, he starts breaking down crying. And they realize, oh my God, like you were born.
Yeah,
born
actually, that scene was incredible. So basically, to frame that scene is he's training a bunch of guys how to fight, and he's kind of like, you guys suck at fighting. But then he notices this one old man has, instead of having a bamboo spear, he has an actual spear.
Right.
And he's like, where did you get that? And then so he kind of like yells at these farmers until eventually they show him like this like stockpile of weapons and armor from, dead soldiers from the war.
Right.
And he also finds out that they have more than just like the white rice that they're feeding them. They have sake and mushrooms and all this different stuff that they've been hiding.
Right.
And so he brings this to the rest of the samurai and explains, and the rest of the samurai are ready to just like, they actually want to kill the villagers themselves at this point.
Right. Because it was taken from their brethren. Like they killed samurai for these things. They chased defeated warriors and people who were retreating and killed them in their minds.
Or even just took them off the dead bodies.
Right.
Which, is still disrespectful. And, obviously we have this illusion that samurai were super honorable. So then this guy that we find out was born a farmer yells at them like, why do you think they're in this position? They had nothing to do with this war. They didn't want this.
Right.
They were forced to let samurai into their village, forced to feed the samurai. They have nothing. They had to hide stuff from samurai. They're the reason, like samurai, you are the reason why they're in this like shitty life.
Right.
And then all the samurai felt fucking terrible.
Right.
Kind of thing. Which I really enjoyed.
Yeah.
And then later on in the movie, I'll just say this, and then one of the other things that I liked about this movie versus the other two, this movie had multiple skirmishes. It wasn't just like one big battle. The 1960s version had 2 battles, but this one was, 4 or 5 over the course of a couple of months. And there's a skirmish where the bandits destroy the mill, and this crazy guy goes and tries to save the mill, and this woman dies and hands him her baby as he's dying, and he's like, this is me, this is how I began, what's going to happen to this baby, kind of thing.
Right.
He was the character that I definitely related to the most. I think that was a good call bringing him up.
Yeah, definitely. And he was in another movie by Kurosawa, Rashomon. which was also great. And the other guy, Takashi, who played the Obi-Wan type character, he's been I've seen a couple other Kurosawa films he was in, and he's completely different in those movies. And that's why his performance in this also stands out. He was in a movie Akira, which was a more modern film in the 50s, and he played like this down on his luck city planner kind of guy who was completely in despair, nothing like his character in Seven Samurai. And he was also in Rashomon, and his like range of acting, the older guy, is incredible. Like, he's one of my favorite guys from that period in terms of these Japanese films, because he could play the Obi-Wan, but then he could also play the creepy old piece of shit man beautifully, which he really does. In this movie Akira, which is about a guy basically dying, and what he does with those last few months of his life is a great, very deep film. And again, I probably fucked up the title, but it's Akira or something.
All right, so I guess we should move on to Magnificent Seven, 1960. I'll summarize this one.
Okay.
So this one's from IMDb. This is from Gary KMCD. When their small village is once again attacked by Bandit Calvera, 3 Mexican farmers head north to try and buy guns. They ask Chris Adams to help, but he suggests they hire experienced gunmen instead. He soon recruits 5 others and eventually accepts a 6th, who he initially rejected, but made it impossible for him to say no. That is phrased very poorly. Together, they develop a plan to secure the town, defend it against Calvera's attack. In that time, friendships are formed, love blossoms between one of them and a beautiful local girl. Not all of them will survive the attack.
There you go.
That's phrased a little weird, but it kind of hits all the major points.
Yep. And it's basically Seven Samurai in Mexico. Really.
Yep. So the thing that's interesting about this movie, and I'll just say at the top, out of the 3 that I watched, I think I found this one to be the most enjoyable, just like the easiest to watch.
Okay.
I think the 2016 one was easy to watch too, but I think this one was better. But it's actually a miracle that this movie even got made. Do you know the background of this movie?
I don't. I feel like I've looked it up at some point, but I couldn't tell you.
So there's a lot of shit that went down on this set. So first off, when this movie was about to get made, there was about to be an actors' strike in Hollywood.
Oh shit! Which
didn't affect movies that were already cast. So they had to rush to get this movie cast, and there were a couple issues. So Yul Brynner plays Chris. He's the lead, and of course, people will know Yul Brynner from The Ten Commandments, The King and I, bunch of different westerns. Huge, one of the biggest actors of his day.
Right.
He actually gets casting vetoes on all of his movies because he was one of the biggest stars at the time. So he made it difficult because he kept saying no to people. And eventually the director had to be like, we're not going to make this movie if we don't get it. So eventually, they did cast, they get everybody going. Well, Yul Brynner and Steve McQueen hated each other. Hated each other. So Yul Brynner is something like 5'10", and Steve McQueen's 5'9.5" or something like that. So anytime they were shooting outside, Yul Brynner would take dirt. He would make a mound of dirt to get himself like an inch taller than Steve McQueen. And Steve McQueen thought this was funny, so he would just kick the pile of dirt every time he could, and that pissed off Yul Brynner. The other thing that would go on is Steve McQueen is arguably the second lead in this movie, and he had just come off Great Escape, so he's big right then.
Right.
He kept doing things that Yul Brynner felt like he was trying to upstage him. So if Yul Brynner was doing a monologue or whatever, Steve McQueen would take off his hat. He would like run his fingers against the brim of the hat, or he would shake the shotgun, pretending to clean his shotgun, everything like that. So Yul Brynner was like, he's trying to distract from me and take my screen time away, kind of thing. So they were like arguing constantly, and Yul Brynner actually tried to get Steve McQueen off the movie.
Jesus.
So what ended up happening is the director, I can't remember his name, he quickly lost control of this film set, and all the other actors started doing little things that they can get noticed on screen. And it was just insane. And then the other thing that happens, apparently the same studio made a movie in Mexico a few years prior that made Mexico look really bad, like dirty and disgusting. And so they weren't going to let them film in Mexico unless they let somebody from the censor board of Mexico appear. So they had this guy who can veto anything from the Mexican censor board.
Wow.
And so initially, like, these are supposed to be poor farmers. So they had them in these like, worn down, dirty clothes. And the Mexican board was like, no, that's not okay. They need to be in clean clothes. So that's why all the Mexican farmers ended up in white clothing in the desert because they wanted to be seen as being able to afford clean clothes, kind of thing.
Interesting.
So between all that, it was a pain in the ass to get the movie to be made. It almost wasn't made. It was almost shut down several times, and it actually didn't make any money in the United States. It was a bomb in the box office here, but it did really, really well in Europe. And actually, for the director of Seven Samurai loved the movie and actually sent the director a ceremonial sword.
Oh, that's awesome! I didn't know that.
So, yeah, it's a crazy background. So I've read all this before I watched the movie,
Right.
So I kind of appreciated the fact, like, that underdog story. Like, this movie really had no business getting made, but it did.
Right. That's awesome.
So it's a really kind of fucked up way that this movie got made.
That really is. But I'm glad that Steve McQueen wasn't ejected from the movie, because he's my favorite guy in that film. Like, Steve McQueen, I love in anything he's in. Yeah, but he's so great in this. He's like the Brad Pitt to George Clooney in Ocean's 11. Like, he's that great right-hand man.
I think he's he's charming. I think he's like a slightly less handsome Paul Newman.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He probably would have even been great in Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid, either as Butch or Sundance. Like, he could have easily
I agree.
he's so charismatic, so charming. But I loved his just little reactions and his little cuts to his, he has all these reaction shots throughout Magnificent Seven that I'm like, how is this not a GIF? How do we not have this? Like, it's perfect. It's like during dialogue scenes, they'll just...
Well, and honestly, like, all the things that he did that upstaged Yul Brynner,
yeah.
If he didn't do these things, I think the movie would have been a lot more boring. Like, it wouldn't have been as interesting. Like, just seeing a man standing still while another man's talking, like, that's not how we are in real life.
Right.
If you and I were in the same room and you were talking, I'd probably be fidgeting. I'd probably be looking at my phone. I'd be emoting. Like, that's how real people act. So honestly, I didn't even notice all these things that people said that he was doing. I was just like, that just seems like he's
being natural,
acting, being a normal person,
right.
Like, kind of thing. So I really appreciated all the little nuance that he had. And I think that Yul Brynner was just being a dick.
Right.
And it wasn't just Yul Brynner. Like, Steve McQueen didn't like him either. There was a point where Steve McQueen complained that Yul Brynner had the biggest horse, but it was actually like Robert Vaughn's character who had the biggest horse. And he's like, I don't care about your horse. Between my horse and Yul Brynner's horse is bigger. Like, they were just being super petty.
That was a time period too, right? People were always about screen time, and like, it just seemed a little more petty behind the scenes back then.
And they eventually made up on Steve McQueen's deathbed. Well, because Steve McQueen died of cancer.
80.
Yul Brynner did visit him, and they kind of made up. And he was like, "Hey, thank you for letting me be in this movie. I was like the, petulant child trying to go, against the king or something like that." And then Yul Brynner said something along the lines of, he goes, "You were the young prince, and I was the king, both of us equally as royal," kind of thing.
Right.
Kind of thing. So, like, they made up for
That's
it. He
cool.
understood what was going on down the line. So,
I'm glad.
It was a kind of a happy ending.
Yeah. Who else is in this movie, though? We had Charles Bronson's in it.
Charles Bronson was great in this movie. He was probably my second favorite character.
Yeah, he was great. Because when I first saw this movie, I'd only seen him mainly in like older movies, like the Death Wish movies, where he was an older guy.
Right. Same thing.
I did not even recognize him.
He was actually really handsome when he was younger.
Very.
Like, he doesn't look when he's in like Death Wish and everything, he kind of looks like a gnarled old man. Like, he kind of looks.
Yeah, he's shirtless in this movie a bunch, and he has like a perfect body.
Yeah, they're all shirtless in this movie when they're digging the trench.
Yep.
And I'm like, these guys are all like men. Right. They're all like jacked.
Yeah.
And like, this is before like there were gyms. Like, you didn't really like work out in gyms. Like, people just had really good bodies back in the day.
Apparently.
They weren't eating all the processed food that we have. And
that must be it, because these guys, they had like, it wasn't a gross like ripped body, but it was like they had these. I don't know why we're sitting here talking about shirtless men. I don't know how we just devolved into this, but
it's totally okay.
They
I'm
are
secure enough in my sexuality to talk about these ripped men.
They are magnificent, and that's really where the name came from.
And there were seven of them.
There were seven. But they were all 10s in my book.
Yep.
But Charles Bronson was fantastic in that. I saw him later on. He did Once Upon a Time in Mexico, which was also a movie he'd done when he was younger. But this movie and his role specifically in it, he's like my favorite character, definitely next to Steve McQueen. Like,
and he's basically the same character that you liked in Seven Samurai, the kind of the crazy guy.
Yep.
Who bonds with the kids.
I think that's more Chico, right? I think that was supposed to be more the crazy character, like the
Chico. I feel is more like the guy who Chico was like the younger guy who fell in love with the villager. Who
they may have mixed it around a little bit. I think they kind of almost combined
they mixed things up a little bit.
Because was his face cutting wood? Wasn't he using when we first see Charles Bronson
was cutting wood? Yeah,
but there was the guy
like
Maybe we're talking about the different.
Yeah, the first samurai they found was cutting wood that was different, or he was doing something with bamboo.
Yeah, even though he was splitting wood.
They kind of like mixed and matched.
Yeah, I think that's what they did. They must have just mixed it up, and it's not like an exact like, oh, this is that exact
because
character.
The thing that's in this version, like Robert Vaughn's character Lee only has less than 15 lines of dialogue. There's like 2 or 3 of the Magnificent Seven who had less than like 10 lines of dialogue.
Right.
So the people who really dominated the screen, obviously Yul Brynner as Chris, Steve McQueen as Vin, Charles Bronson as O'Reilly, and then you had, I can't remember the actor's name, but he played Chico, who was the young hothead.
Yeah, exactly. Which I guess they call it Horst Buchholz. I don't know who he is.
Yep, that's who he is.
Yeah.
So those were kind of like, it was like 4 people, and then the other 3, like Britt, the guy who was good with the knives.
Yep.
I don't think he spoke at all other than saying "I won."
Yeah, that was James Coburn, wasn't it?
Yeah,
James Coburn.
Yeah, it was James
who
Coburn.
just ended up becoming like a classic actor in and of himself. As an older guy and trained with Bruce Lee along with Steve McQueen. They both were students of Bruce Lee. But yeah, he didn't have a lot of dialogue. He was pretty much silent throughout, but I loved him. He was supposed to be like the guy who doesn't have a lot of dialogue in Seven Samurai, actually.
Yeah, he was supposed to be kind of like the lurker.
Yeah.
The thing that's interesting about this movie, so there was a sequel that came out like 6 years later, and only 3 people survived. Only three samurai survived at the end of Seven Samurai. Only 3 people survived in this one. Yep. And so when they did the sequel, the only person who came back was Yul Brynner. So they recast Vin and they recast Chico.
Oh, wow.
But then there was a TV show that ran for like 12 years.
What? 12 years?
And Robert Vaughn, who played Lee, who was like the really dapper, good-looking guy who was dressed all fancy.
Yeah.
He actually showed up in that TV show throughout as a judge. And then there was I mentioned at the top of the episode, like a space-themed one called like a Battle Amongst the Stars or something like that. And he made an appearance in that. And I just think it's funny that the guy who is arguably in the movie the least or close to shows up in all the different versions of this franchise. Right. It's just kind of interesting. So what do you have any highlights about this movie? Anything particularly you want to shout out?
It's definitely Steve McQueen, Charles Bronson. I actually like James Coburn too with the knives. I think he had he was supposed to be kind of awesome with knives. I love that. Eli Wallach as the head of the bandits. I felt like they gave him more of a character than they did in even though Seven Samurai is 3.5, or more hours long.
Right.
They didn't really. The bandits weren't really fleshed out. And this one, Eli Wallach has more of a story. You kind of you get into the character a little bit more, learn more about that character in this movie. I think the bandits.
Yeah, they
a little bit more.
Yeah, they absolutely did. They put him in a red shirt, had him wearing jewelry to show that like he uses the stuff that he steals.
Right.
And he has this big like monologue at the beginning where he basically says, "I've been stealing from the village for years. Like there used to be gold candlesticks in the church. There used to be coins. There used to be food and everything. Like where is everything?" And one of the guys in the village stands up and he's like, "Well, you took it all. You think we're going to replace the gold that you stole with more gold," kind of thing.
Right.
And so he ends up like shooting one of the villager who like stands up for himself. He's like, "I'm going to be back, eventually." And this is supposed to be, this movie takes place over like 4 to 6 weeks, where the Seven Samurai took place over months.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be like, and the way you can tell that time passed is that when we first meet like the Obi-Wan Kenobi like character,
shaves his head.
He's getting his head shaved, and he like shaves it all the way down. And then by the end of the movie, he's got like probably half an inch of hair,
right,
kind of thing. And it's supposed to be several months that go by in that movie. This one, it's supposed to be 4 to 6 weeks,
right? And it is a significantly shorter movie. It's just over 2 hours as opposed to the one that's closer to 4 hours.
And I mentioned that I wanted to go back to Seven Samurai. I think I can bring up some of the stuff I wanted to go over.
Okay.
So one of the things I did like about Seven Samurai more than I did at least the 2016, which we haven't talked about, and this movie did it to an extent, was getting to know the villagers, kind of thing, developing a relationship.
Yep.
And that's honestly where a large chunk of the 3 hours went to.
Yeah.
In Seven Samurai. So yeah, that's a huge chunk of the 3 hours is them getting to know the villagers and having the young guy develop a relationship with a woman who's pretending to be a man, and
right.
All this different stuff that takes time. This movie, I think, did a pretty good job with that as well. Obviously, it truncated it quite a bit in terms of like it still had Chico falling in love with that girl and pretending like he didn't want it.
Right.
It still had that whole interaction. Which this movie took a lot of lines from the original kind of thing, where then the Seven Samurai, there's a point where like the villagers are hiding. They don't show up until like the crazy guy makes the alarm go and kind of was like, why are you guys hiding from us, kind of thing.
Right.
The same thing happens in this one where they show up to the village and there's no women, there's no children. And so I think it was Chico, he sounds the alarm to get everyone in a panic, and they're like, this is how you treat us, this is bullshit, like why are you guys, we're here to help you and you guys are treating us like we're an invading army.
Right.
And he says that the girl that he captures, and like honestly I can get why the girl feels this way, he sees this girl at the river, he like abducts her, brings her back, it's like she thinks we're gonna rape them kind of thing. And there's a really weird line where Yul Brynner as Chris says, well, we might.
Yeah, I remember
but
that.
They could have given us the benefit of the doubt.
Weird.
And it's like, that's super fucked up. Then the other line that they take, like this is only in this is in all three movies, but there's a point where food is a big deal in the first two movies. So in the first two movies, they're basically getting paid in food, and then in Magnificent Seven, 1960, they're getting paid $20 for the entire campaign.
That's right.
But mostly it's the food. In Seven Samurai, it's just food. So there's a point where in Seven Samurai, they're talking about how the village is just eating millet, where the samurai are getting white rice. And so the Seven Samurai decide to share their rice with the children. Yeah. And this one, kind of the same thing happens. They're like, you guys are getting the best food. And they're like, you know what, we'll share it. And then they go, and one of the kids, or Steve McQueen's character to one of the kids is like, hey, do you have an older, appreciative sister?
Right, which is also in Seven Samurai.
I like how they do keep some of these things. Like, it's interesting that there are certain things that are just universal.
Right.
It doesn't matter if it's in Japanese or English. Men are horny.
That's right. You know, in with regard to the character development with the first Magnificent Seven, as opposed to Seven Samurai, Seven Samurai spends more time with these characters. I never personally felt invested like I did with Seven Samurai. When I watched Magnificent Seven, I liked the movie, but I don't love the movie like I do Seven Samurai. And there's something about that earlier one that they spend so much time with it that I just automatically find myself in that world. Right. Magnificent Seven, I'm watching a movie. Seven Samurai, I'm in the world.
I think I definitely related to Magnificent Seven a couple characters. Like, I actually felt something when O'Reilly, that's Charles Bronson's character, died, because throughout the movie, the kids just take to him.
That's true.
Like, the kids in the village love him. And he keeps explaining, like, they keep, like, shitting on their parents, like, oh, we wish you were our dad because you're brave and everything. And they keep calling their own parents cowards. And he's like, you guys don't understand. Like, it takes a lot to give up their life to raise a family and everything. It's really easy to go be somebody like me who doesn't have a family, doesn't have a town. I can go anything. I don't have any responsibilities. They're afraid for you, and they're trying to do what they think is right. Like, so he has this whole thing where he's trying to tell the kids, like, don't look up to me, look up to your parents. And then the kids keep following him around even in these battles. So he's trying to keep these kids safe in a battle, and ultimately dies because he's trying to look out for these kids. And the kids are like, oh, our bad. We didn't mean for that to happen. And he goes, hey, look. And he points to their parents. They're like, look, those are your parents fighting. This is what you wanted. Like, they're everything. They love you and they're fighting. Go be with your parents, kind of thing.
Right.
Which I thought was a really touching moment. Like, I
do agree.
That death actually did affect me.
Completely. I was the same way.
The others were kind of... The other thing that was kind of weird about this movie, and I kind of... Initially, I was kind of annoyed by it, but then later on, I kind of, like, understood it, where most of the other other actors or the other Magnificent Seven, they just kind of, like, died. Like, you didn't see who killed them. It was just, like, you hear a gunshot from off screen, you see them hit. So Britt, the guy who was really good with knives, you see him, like, shooting, you see him go under cover, and then he pops up from cover, and he just has a gunshot. It's like, we don't see anything from when that happened. When Charles Bronson's character got shot twice, he got shot in the arm at the beginning of the final skirmish, and we don't see it.
Yeah.
Lee, the dapper guy, he has, like, PTSD from the Civil War, and he has nightmares and everything like that. And there's a point where he's just kind of walking around the battle, not fighting anybody. And then he finally, like, walks into this jail where there's people, and he pulls out his gun and kills, like, 5 people.
Right.
Lets out the jail. And then he goes outside and he sees everyone kind of fighting, and he smiles, and he realizes, like, he's killed again. And he's kind of got this moment where he's trying to figure out what he's going to do. And then he just gets killed. Like, you don't see anything. So there were a lot of these, like, deaths that came from nowhere. And initially I was annoyed because in modern movies, and they do this in 2016, you get this whole buildup. Like, you see, whether it's foreshadowed or you straight up see the guy sneaking up on the hero. But in this, it's honestly like what war really is. Like, war, like, death is just pointless in war. Like, it just happens. Like, you don't always see how you die.
Yeah.
And
it's not a clear, like, reason why or anything else. It's not like it has to be a scripted reason why. It's sort of like, you're in a melee, you're in chaos. And sometimes you're just going to get the dick end of chaos sometimes.
Yeah, it could have even been a villager who killed him. We have no idea. It's just the chaos of war and battle and kind of thing. So it's once again looking at it as a modern viewer, it was hard to like, well, how did he die? Why did he die? That's strange.
Right.
But honestly, it's more realistic that way that we don't know.
Right. Agreed. On Seven Samurai, I'm sorry, I just wanted to make sure I mentioned one of my favorite scenes. It's very small. But before we moved past it, I wanted to mention it. There's that scene where those villagers, so they decide on their plan. They have to strategize how they're going to handle these 40 bandits coming in. And they decide they're going to basically give up the houses across the river or whatever, like on the other side of the river. They're just going to be like, we have to basically abandon those 3 houses in order to save the whole village. And the people whose houses those are like, fuck that. Like one of the guys is like, he's like, throw down your spears. We're going to go back and defend our own houses. And they're like abandoning the line. Like they've been training these guys. They're putting them together. They're trying to make them into a team. And these bunch of people are like, screw this. If you guys aren't going to save our house, we're going to go save our own house and you deal with yours. We're not going to fight for you. And they throw down their spears and they start running off. And then Takashi, who's been cool and calm the whole movie as the Obi-Wan type, yells like in Japanese, whatever he says, and they stop in their tracks and he just pulls out his sword and he just starts running at them like, and they fucking freak the fuck out and run back in line and pick up their spears, and you're like, this guy's a motherfucker. He's the man. Like he pulls out his sword and with his voice and his movement and the music all of a sudden kicks in at that point, and there's this great little score that underlines it. There's something about that scene that gives me chills because
they tried to do that in the 1960s one, and it wasn't anywhere near as effective. So there's a point where in the 1960s one, they do have 2 skirmishes. So there's one where they kind of like get the bandits to come in, and they have all these like fences and stuff, and they have this big thing like, you think those are going to keep us out? They're like, no, those are designed to keep you in. And then all the villagers come out and they kill a big chunk of the bandits. But after that, they have this like big party and feast, and then a bunch of people are like, well, maybe we should like not do that again. Like they're going to come back and they know what to expect, so maybe we should like give up, and maybe he'll see that we're willing to fight and he'll be a little bit more lenient on us. And a bunch of people are kind of like that, like, yeah, let's go kind of like parlay with the
bad guys
with Calavera. And Chris, played by Yul Brynner, is like, no, at this point we can't give up, and if anybody wants to give up, like, I'll kill them myself, kind of thing. And it wasn't anywhere near as effective as it was in Seven Samurai.
It really wasn't. There was something about that. Maybe because we were 2 hours into the movie, and Takashi's been cool, calm, and kind of like a wise, stoic leader in a way, but also very nice, and like you just like his character. And he did that one thing earlier on where he saved that baby from that thief. So he did have that scene early when you first meet him. But there's something about that scene that it's like, this guy's a born badass leader, samurai. Like this is what he does, and it kind of comes out. All his years of experience and his battles and the wars he's fought and everything else comes out in that moment. He's like, I'm gonna put these guys in their place. I love it.
I guess we should move on to the 2016. There is one scene that I want to talk about that comes up in all 3.
Okay.
So I'll save it until we get into this one. Do you want to summarize this next one?
Last time I didn't acknowledge the person on IMDb that I was stealing from, so I should probably do that this time.
Bastard.
I'm a bastard. All right, let me see. So, director Anton. Okay, this is from. Should I acknowledge who this is? Oh, does it even say?
Yes.
It doesn't say this one.
Yeah.
It doesn't say who it is.
Don't acknowledge it then.
You don't get to get acknowledged. Sorry. All right, director Anton Fuqua brings his modern vision to a classic story in The Magnificent Seven. With the town of Rose Creek under the deadly control of industrialist Bartholomew Bogue, the desperate townspeople employ protection from 7 outlaws, bounty hunters, gamblers, and hired guns. As they prepare the town for the violent showdown that they know is coming, these 7 mercenaries find themselves fighting for more than money. It's a pretty good summary, whoever you are.
Yep. So right off the bat, I have to say the only thing that I actually liked better about this one than any of the other versions, now obviously the Japanese one gets a pass at this portion, but is the more diverse cast.
Oh, of course, right.
So obviously in Japan, you're only going to have Japanese people. I'm fine with that one. He did have Charles Bronson played a half Mexican, half Irishman in the 1960s version. I really do appreciate the diverse cast. So you had what's his name? I can't remember his name, but he plays Storm Shadow in G.I. Joe. He's in the Red movies with like Bruce Willis and all that. You know, they had him basically be the Brit character from the 1960s. They had they actually got like a Native American man to play they got a Native American person to be part of the Magnificent Seven. I did appreciate that, and then of course Denzel Washington being black,
being the lead guy
in this, like it's being the lead guy. Historically, does it make a ton of sense? Probably not, but for a modern, cinema, it does make a lot of sense, and it's Antoine Fuqua who works with Denzel in like every movie he does.
Training Day.
So that kind of what's weird is this director, he is so hit or miss. Like Training Day, Academy Award winning movie, amazing. Equalizer, great movie. Right. And then he does this, which I don't think is great. And he did Olympus Has Fallen with Gerard Butler.
I actually liked Olympus Has Fallen a lot. You're gonna tell. I actually really like that movie as an action film.
Fun movie.
I love.
It's a fun movie, but it's not good. It is.
When it comes to just generally, like if you're gonna analyze it from that, totally. But for some reason, I just gave myself to that movie. It took my virginity. I was good. Like I
watched it and I enjoyed it actually. The first time I watched it was actually when I first got my cat Haggard, who's being a dickhead today. We'd only had him for like a few days, and I put him on Netflix. And when we first got our cat, he would hide unless we had the TV on, and he loved watching TV. So he literally sat there and watched Olympus Has Fallen with me the entire time.
Jesus,
which was really strange. But it's not a good movie. It's fun, and I think there's something to be said. Like you don't have to be. It doesn't have to be a good movie to be fun. Like that Venom movie that's out right now, or actually it's coming out on DVD soon. That movie's terrible. Yeah. But it's fun.
Exactly.
Like there are moments that are legitimately fun.
And that's the thing.
And it upsets me that movie's actually doing so well, because now Sony's talking about pulling Tom Holland from MCU.
I don't know.
Pulling Spider-Man from MCU, so that kind of bums me out.
That's not smart.
But that's a different topic.
Right. But yeah.
So this movie,
but Anton, the director, he did this one. He did Olympus Has Fallen. He did Training Day, did Equalizer. He did I think he did that King Arthur movie too with Ian Griffith.
He's done a ton of movies. He's an incredible. Like it's just weird that he has such great movies and movies that are just they're not.
He did Southpaw, the boxing movie. Yeah, Southpaw.
Great movie, great movie, and it's just I don't know. I when I found out he was directing this, I'm like, oh, this is gonna be really good, and it's not a bad movie. It's not, but this, I'm just gonna say it up front. This is the kind of movie that, at the end of the episodes, we always say, hey, was this a necessary remake or a necessary reboot or whatever? And in this particular case, I think it did everything that we don't want in a remake or a reboot, that it didn't really bring anything new other than having, a more diverse cast.
Right.
The little plot changes they have aren't enough to justify this movie existing. And the other thing is it's too pretty.
It definitely polished.
It's so polished. It does some color correction. There's some really nice nature shots and everything. Like, it is a beautifully composed and shot film. The cinematography is great. But when I watch a Western, I kind of want that little bit of grittiness.
Yes.
And it didn't have that. I was actually talking to Katrina while I was watching the 1960s version, and I was telling her, I'm like, I don't know what it is. I'm like, I don't know if I necessarily like it, but the movies from like the 60s, that's kind of more accurate in terms of what people actually look like. Like the coloring is more accurate. The movies are still sharp, even though they're not technically HD. They've been remastered and everything, but they look incredible. But when you look at movies today, like everything is color corrected. They film it matte. I can't remember what the actual technology they use when they film it, but basically it pulls most of the color out, films it kind of matted. Yeah. And then they like Mad Max, they made it all orange, and then you have a lot of other, like Transformers movies are gray or blue. You have The Matrix was tinted green. Like they do all this color correction stuff now, and even in movies that like this, like you can definitely see that there's like a filter placed over the movie. Like it's too polished, and when I watch a Western, I want to see some grit.
Right. No, it's true. I mean, go ahead.
No, that's it. It's just like, when I'm going to bring up True Grit again. Like when you watch the Coen brothers version of that movie, it looks like a modern movie, but it has that grittiness. It looks dirty. Like everything in this movie was too clean. Like everyone's clothing was, nicely, firmly pressed, clean. All the villagers and everybody looked like they were in their Sunday's finest all the time.
Right. Which again is one of the things I love about Seven Samurai. They're in ratty, tattered robes, and they're dirty, and it's not trying to be shiny at all, and it's dirty and dusty, and dust is always kicking up as they walk, and you don't see one thing that looks like it was made today.
Exactly.
But Magnificent Seven definitely feels like a Hollywood 2016 action movie.
Yeah, like the only person who looked dirty was Vincent D'Onofrio's character as Jack Horn.
Right.
Like he was this like burly mountain man. And then even with that, like I think Vincent D'Onofrio is an incredible actor, whether you look at his recent stuff like Daredevil or you go back to like Full Metal Jacket. He's an incredible actor. Yeah. But in this movie, he made some interesting choices. Like he does this like really high pitched kind of like I don't even know how to describe it. It's just like really weird. It's like raspy but also high pitched. It's almost like American Voldemort.
American Voldemort.
It's just weird. Like I don't know what he was doing. And he was still great in this movie.
Yeah.
The scene that I kind of want to talk about that appeared in all three, which we haven't brought up yet, is in all three versions there's a character where they see in some sort of competition. So in the 1960s version and this one, it's a shooting competition. In Seven Samurai, it's literally they're using like wooden sticks to do like a sword fight. In all three versions, our hero says that they won, and then the other person they were competing against says that they won or it was a draw. Right. So then they decide they want to do the real thing. So in Seven Samurai, instead of using sticks, they use real swords, and the guy who's not our hero dies immediately. In the two Western versions, instead of using guns, the character throws a knife instead of drawing a gun, kind of thing. And I actually thought that was pretty cool, and I actually liked that better than I did the Seven Samurai version. I think it showed that I think it did something to show that the character was good at more than just one thing.
Right, and I think he drew a knife against a gun, was it? Like his knife was faster than a gun, which is cool in itself, and that was in any movie. That's kind of a cool setup.
Yeah, and that was in both versions. So Britt did that in the 1960s version, and then Billy did that in this version, and I actually really did like that.
Right.
And I appreciated in this version that Billy was like an excellent martial artist, and there's points where he's going in the battlefield and he's throwing knives and he's like stabbing people. Like the thing about this movie is like the action scene at the end is a better action scene than any of the other two, realistically. Then that's because obviously we have stunt coordinators and we have months of planning and all this stuff. The special effects in this movie, there's not a ton. Everything there obviously is the Gatling gun. There are a few explosions, but for the most part, it's mostly practical. Yep. But they get months of planning, and they have they've got these actors who are martial artists or who have done action movies before. Like this is what they do. But realistically, like even though it's a significantly better action scene than any of the other ones, it's still kind of a mild one compared to like today's standards.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I when I think of these three, I think of this last one, the newest one, as an action movie. I don't really think of the other one, even though they have action. And apparently, Seven Samurai is considered like the grandfather or the godfather of modern action films because a lot of elements used in that, like slow motion and like the reluctant hero and some of the battle scenes.
They did some interesting frame rate things. Like when people are running, they sped it up. Sometimes, like that was a really interesting thing that they did that, back in that time, not a lot of movies were doing.
Oh, that movie is very kinetic. Like that Seven Samurai never feels slow and boring. Like it's always moved. Like something about it. Like sometimes it's in the editing. It's in the pacing of the scenes. It's but that movie is very kinetic. It very much feels for 3.5 to 4 hours. That movie moves, and
it does.
Yeah. So that's but the newest one feels more like an action film than any of the three.
Which is weird because it only has like one scene. Right. So the 1960s has 2 skirmishes, one, right? And then Seven Samurai have several where they're just, tallying how many people got killed, right? This one, there's a few little ones as you're getting introduced to the characters. Like Faraday, played by Chris Pratt, is like cheating at cards. And then like these guys come up to like try to take their money and he ends up killing them. And, we've come to expect a lot from Chris Pratt. He's really charming and everything. I felt like he seemed like he was bored in this movie. I didn't see that same charm that I've seen from him in like everything else. The only time we're at the end when he there's a point where he lures some people into a trap and he blows them up and he kind of like smiles when he blows these people up. That was like the only time I really felt like, oh, there's the Chris Pratt that we know and love.
Right.
And then the scene where he sacrificed himself, I thought he did great, but I felt like he seemed a little bored. And to be honest, he might have been. Like, he was working nonstop from Guardians of the Galaxy, Guardians of the Galaxy 2, Passengers. Yeah, he was doing a ton of movies back to back to back to back, Jurassic Park. So he might have just been exhausted, and maybe this one is not the one he was as interested in. I don't know, but he seemed bored. I felt like Denzel Washington seemed a little bored. Like, he was kind of... his performance was muted. Like he didn't have any highs or lows, and that could be part of the character. But
Yul Brynner plays it a little emotion. Like that in the original, in the second movie. Yeah.
So So I don't know. And then like it was weird because Ethan Hawke was in this movie,
Right?
And he didn't do very much. And I was kind of like, I don't know if I don't remember what episode it was in, but I went on a rant against Ethan Hawke a few episodes back.
I did hear that, yeah.
Because, and I'll just paraphrase. So basically, a few months ago, Ethan Hawke made this like super ignorant statement saying that like superhero movies have no substance or whatever. He would get along great with Neil, but he had this thing where basically he said that he watched Logan because everyone told him like it's not a good superhero movie, it's a good movie, which I agree. I think Logan's a great movie, and he says. But he goes, I watched it, and it was still a bunch of people in spandex fighting things. And it's like, that's not true.
Not true at
like,
all.
Just unequivocally, like, there are no superhero costumes in Logan. Right. Like, it's not. And then so he goes and just shits on the entire genre. And then he goes and basically says, you know, it upsets him that so many people watch all these remakes, reboots, superhero movies, all this stuff with Flash, but then don't go see his independent films kind of thing, which I think there's a place for independent films. And and it's a shame that MoviePass isn't working out as well as it was, because when MoviePass was in its like heyday, I went and saw things like Lady Bird, 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, things that I would have never paid to go see.
Right.
And I really enjoyed them. And I think the issue with independent films is not that people necessarily don't want to see them. It's when a movie costs $14, $15, people don't want to go spend money to see something that they don't know for sure they're going to like, where they know they're going to like Venom, or they know they're going to like Avengers and everything like that. It's like, if you're going to spend money, you want to spend on something you know you're going to like, right?
It's very true.
Which I totally get. So it really bothered me that he was in this movie that had no substance, really. Like, there was no real artistic merit of this movie. So it was kind of bothered me seeing him in this movie. And I know this movie came out before he made that statement, but you know, he's made some questionable movies. That Daybreakers vampire movie that he was in. So it just kind of really bothered me how elitist he comes off, and then he does stuff like this when obviously he just wants a paycheck.
Right. Well, because
this is a paycheck movie.
Yeah, but I take anybody to task who says, oh, and they make general statements about anything like that. Like making any sort of
exactly.
I just don't get it. Like, I don't get that kind of mentality where anybody's like, oh, blah. Like somebody who goes. I mean, I generally don't like newer music, but I don't make general sweeping statements like music these days has no substance. I'm like, have you heard some of the fucking doo-wop songs from the 50s and 60s that you love? Because those things don't say shit. Like they're as bland and boring and uninsightful as any modern R&B or pop song. So like, let's not pretend like every song and every music, you know, all the music from back in the day was Led Zeppelin.
When you look at when people say, "Oh, I love '80s music," there was a lot of shit music in the '80s. But we're just like when you go on Pandora or Spotify or whatever and do an '80s mix, it's only the good stuff, like the good Queen stuff, Journey, the Cars, and everything. Like it's not, it doesn't have like all the nonsense that came out.
Exactly. I'm a huge old school hip hop fan, and if people are acting like every single person was, you know, DMX or Biggie or you know Nas or whatever. Like, no, there was a lot of crap too. There's a lot of people we considered whack back then. Let's not pretend it's always been golden. You're ridiculous. But so it's just sweeping statements like, you know, oh, superhero genres are vapid, they're all the same movie. I'm like, they're not. You're just seeing it through bias. You're wearing these like filtered goggles. You're not actually trying to watch the movie for what it is. You're too set in your ways. Right.
And then I also take umbrage with the fact that he was just like, people should go watch my independent films. And now I'm paraphrasing what he said, but it's just like, the problem with independent films, and I like independent films just fine, it's just some of them are just weird and out there and you really don't know what you're going to get. And that's why a lot of people will watch these movies once they come out on DVD or VHS, streaming or whatever. And I agree that, you know, it would be nice if people went and saw these movies in theaters. But when movie tickets are so expensive, like, don't get mad at the fan or at people for not watching your movies. Go to your distributor and say, hey, you know, like go to the theaters and say you're charging way too much. Like, don't go to the consumer, the people that you're trying to get to watch your thing and say they're stupid kind of thing. So,
yeah. And listen, some indie films suck. Like, so if you want to just put it into a genre of drama indie, there's plenty of shitty indie drama, you know, just as much as there are shitty superhero movies, you know, it definitely, nobody's exempt.
Exactly. So getting back into this movie, there wasn't a lot that going on for it. So basically all 3 movies also had some variation of this line when they go to pay the hero, whether it's Denzel Washington's character Chisholm or Chris played by Yul Brynner or like the Obi-Wan Kenobi. Like, I've been offered a lot for my services, but I've never been given everything kind of thing. So ultimately, like in all 3 versions, the main guy basically does the job for nothing. And in this version, I just didn't buy, like, they go and he gets Faraday from Chris Pratt from because he bought his horse. And then everybody else just kind of did it for free.
Right.
So I didn't really buy the motivation of the characters for this. I did appreciate that, at least in this version and in the 1960s version, that one character did leave. So in this version, Ethan Hawke has like PTSD. And so he leaves and then he comes back and kind of like helps save the day. So I did like that, Ethan Hawke character left. In the previous film, it was Lucky left. Mm-hmm. And that version, we didn't even really talk about that. And in the 1960s version, there's a character who's convinced that they're getting more than $20, that there's actually like treasure in the Mexican town.
Right.
And then he leaves, comes back, gets killed, and then to make him feel better, Chris tells him, "Oh yeah, there was like $70,000 worth of treasure here," which I kind of like felt like cheapened it. Like the whole point is they're supposed.
Wasn't that Robert Vaughn in the original one? Did that? Wasn't that his character?
No, Robert Vaughn was Lee. I think. Yeah, Robert Vaughn was like the.
God, who was it in the original?
Yeah, I don't remember who this one. It's just I don't know. I didn't buy the motivation of this, and this one I watched this movie first. And when all the actors died, it was like super telegraphed, and we know exactly what killed them. And that's like a modern thing. Yeah. So it kind of makes the film goer feel good. Like they know what happened. There's closure for the character.
But it dumbs it down.
But I don't know. Like there's not a lot of, like I said, there's not a lot of substance in this movie. There was a lot of great actors in it. And I just don't feel like, I felt like it was more like Ocean's 12 versus Ocean's 11. Like Ocean's 11. Great. Everybody came, brought their A game. Ocean's 12, like everyone kind of phoned it in. And then Ocean's 13 got better.
That's a good comparison.
Like in this movie, I feel like it's Ocean's 12. They got all these amazing actors, but like none of them really shine. None of them really did much.
Yeah. I could see that. Again, I enjoyed this movie as an action film, as like a kind of eye candy movie. But I agree with you on pretty much all the points. It should have been grittier. I mean, it was a PG-13 movie. But so was the original one, was whatever PG-13 would have been at that time. So it didn't have to be rated R, but it definitely felt a little more polished.
I don't necessarily need rated R. I just felt like it was too clean. Yeah, it was too pretty.
I get that.
And overall, like, and don't get me wrong, like this was a movie I really wanted to see in theaters at the time. I think Denzel is a great actor. I think I like Chris Pratt. And then seeing Vincent D'Onofrio and Ethan Hawke, like I expected it to be something great, and it fell short. Yeah. Like it's a perfectly serviceable movie.
Right.
Like I think it's the second long. So this one's like 2.5 hours. The 1960s one is like 2 hours and 6 minutes. It doesn't seem that long. Like the movie flowed perfectly fine. Like the pacing's great. I don't know. I just didn't feel like there was any real charisma to it.
Right.
And it had hit all the same beats. So it had like the knife competition. It had the I've been paid everything. Chris Pratt's character does the same thing. Hey, do you have a sister kind of thing when he's like doing stuff with the kids. Like it literally hit all the same beats. The only thing that's different is a much bigger spectacle battle at the end, and that's just because the budget was
there. Exactly. It's more visually pleasing in that way.
So I think it's safe to say that you think the Seven Samurai is the best of the three, right?
I don't even think it's like a close second on for me. Like I think Seven Samurai is one of my favorite films. I first saw it when I was like 8 or 9 years old. I came across this movie. Somebody was watching it. And I watched it with them.
Oh, wow.
So I was young, and there's something about this movie that's significant enough that as an 8 or 9 year old, it grabbed me. And I had to read subtitles.
That's crazy, because a 9-year-old watching a 3-hour movie.
Yeah, 3.5 hours.
That you have to read.
Yeah, that I had to read. And like something about it was significant enough that it grabbed my attention. I never forgot it. And I rewatched it when I was a teenager. And then again, several times as an adult. And there was something about it, even in that initial viewing, that was like, I just loved it. And I don't feel like that movie's ever boring. I feel like you could jump to any scene in that movie and you're going to be like, what the fuck's going on? And you're watching to figure this movie out. I could get bored in Magnificent Seven in either one of those ones. But I never get bored with that original one. There's something about it. Something the way it filmed, the way the characters, the way the actors even, and it's not like modern acting techniques that they're using. It's definitely, some of it's even like over the top at times for some of the villagers. But
I think some of that could also be just the language barrier. Like,
could be.
A lot of the Asian languages are, have similar words that, you have to enunciate them differently. Yeah. And maybe like this is going to sound terrible, but I had one of my neighbors growing up, he was one of my brother's best friends, was Chinese American, and his mom like moved here from China when she was like in her 40s.
Right.
And she, you know, we used to go over to his house and she would talk to him and it would sound like she was angry and yelling at him. And it was just like she was just asking if we wanted lemonade kind of thing.
It's that staccato kind of like, yeah, it's that kind of, there's an emotion almost in the words and the way they're said.
Exactly. Yeah. So it could be that. Like, I thought it was a little over the top, but after an hour and a half or 2 hours in this movie, I didn't even notice this over the topness of that movie.
You know, it's funny because when I said that, what I meant was, and this appears in some of the other Japanese films I've seen from that time period, specifically Kurosawa films like Ikuru. It's actually the despair and the hopelessness of like the villagers in the beginning and the crying. It seems the sadness that they would convey seemed over the top. I'm okay with it. Like I'm like that's not even me being critical of it. I'm just like that's just how the choice they made, and I'm fine with it because it's very clear that these people are upset. In Akuru, it's like that as well. But I loved it. There's something about it. Like nothing's boring in that movie. Like I'm just like I'm with you. Like I'm with you on everything that happens, from the jokes to the funny stuff to the angry stuff to the battles to the emotion to just the story playing out. It's just fascinating to me.
All right. So I think it's safe for me to say that I think the 1960s version is not necessarily a necessary remake, but I think it adds something to, again, it changes the genre, brings it to a completely different audience. I think the 1960s version is a remake that I think is worthwhile watching, and I think it added something to cinema as a whole. 2016, as much as I wanted to like that movie, it's perfectly serviceable if you've never watched any of the other two. Like, you know, in terms for like a podcast like this, I think it's a perfectly enjoyable film. But in terms of like adding to cinema, I don't think it adds much. And I think that's where we'll wrap this up. Nick, tell us where we can find your podcast. Give us all the deets, and I will make sure to link everything below.
Okay, so you can. We're on a million podcast platforms. We're on Apple Pods. We're on Stitcher. We're on Spotify. A lot of people like to listen to us on Spotify because that's, you know, everybody's got Spotify these days. So you can look for us there. You can go directly to our website, gettothemovies.com, and all of our episodes are on there. It's basically, we've turned it into one big podcast player these days, so you can just, every episode's on there. You can listen to it right through our media player, gettothemovies.com. That's with a number 2, get number 2, the movies. Our company is Get to the Movies, so you can even search Get to the Movies on any of those platforms. You'll also find us. So Get to the Podcast or Get to the Movies.
All right. So, Nick, once again, thank you for substituting for our host. I really appreciate it. Everybody check out their podcast. It's great. I've actually been on their show and I had a blast. I actually went back and re-listened to the episode that I appeared on the other day because the Infinity War trailer part 2 drops, and I was on an episode where we were talking about what we thought was going to happen in Infinity War. Right. And I had a blast recording with these guys. So yeah, they're great guys, great podcast. Listen to them. And thank you guys for listening to Remake Rewind. Check out our other podcast, Ruin My Childhood. You can check out everything that's MDXpods related at MDXpods.com, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook at MDXpods. And we also have patreon.com/MDXpods if you want to support the show. That's it. Thanks for listening.
Goodbye.